Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, what President Trump says about the possibility of a war with China. How prepared is the U.S. military and how a new fighter jet could boost American air dominance. Iris Tao at the White House. A legal battle over the president's power to deport enemy aliens. The latest in the back and forth between the Justice Department and a judge over President Trump's decision to use a wartime law to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members. Arlene Richards has the details. Protesters demonstrate outside of the home of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Meanwhile, Israeli forces report killing several high-level members of the Hamas terrorist group. Jason Perry reports. President Trump says Russia and Ukraine might soon agree to a full ceasefire. This after 3 years of war. Arian Pazdar has what Trump says about a contract to end the fighting once and for all. And flights have resumed at London's Heathrow after a fire knocked out its power supply and shut down Europe's busiest airport for the day, stranding tens of thousands of passengers and causing travel turmoil worldwide. Welcome Hudson with the update.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The U.S. will be well equipped in the event of a war with China. That's what President Trump says as he unveils a sixth-generation fighter jet. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
There's never been a plane designed or made like this, and we'll have them within about a 2-year period. They're going to start manufacturing very soon.
In a bid to strengthen American air dominance, President Trump unveiling a new U.S. fighter jet, the F-47.
With the world's first sixth-generation fighter jet.
And President Trump says Boeing will be the Pentagon's choice to develop this next-generation high-tech fighter jet, which he says will be virtually unseeable and have unprecedented power.
Nothing in the world comes even close to it.
As the president highlights the need to strengthen U.S. defense capabilities, he also denies a New York Times report that says Elon Musk will get a top-secret briefing this morning about potential war plans with China. Trump says Musk was at the Pentagon to talk about cutting costs and that the New York Times keeps publishing fake stories.
But if you read what's out of the New York Times, it's such a dishonest newspaper. It's such garbage. It's, it used to be called all the news that's fit to print. Well, it's all the news that's not fit to print. They have fake sources, or they don't have sources. I think they make most of it up. But this was a made-up story by the New York Times. I call it the failing. It's a failing newspaper. It's failing. And they shouldn't do that. They really are the enemy of the people.
President Trump asked that he will not show such war plans to anyone, especially Musk, who could have a conflict of interest.
Elon has businesses in China, and he would be susceptible perhaps to that.
Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth further alleges that the New York Times did it on purpose.
It was meant to sort of undermine whatever relationship the Pentagon has with Elon Musk.
As both Trump and Hegseth emphasize U.S. military capabilities, Trump says he does not want a war with China, but if it happens, the U.S. will be very well equipped. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The State Department announces sanctions on Chinese and Iranian firms tied to oil trade between Iran and China. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the update.
Sanctions are being imposed on an oil facility in China for allegedly buying and selling Iranian oil.
For the first time, the United States is sanctioning a so-called teapot refinery in China for purchasing millions of barrels of oil worth approximately $500 million.
Sanctions were also announced on several entities and vessels in Iran's shadow fleet for selling oil to China.
Iran's behavior across the globe threatens U.S. national security interests.
The move is part of President Trump's maximum pressure campaign, according to State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce.
President Trump has reimposed a maximum pressure campaign designed to end Iran's nuclear threat, curtail its ballistic missile program, and stop it from supporting terrorist groups.
Bruce also announced the arrival of recently released Taliban hostage George Glassman to the U.S.
George was wrongfully detained in Afghanistan for 2.5 years. He arrived at Joint Base Andrews earlier today, where he was greeted by his wife and a small welcoming party.
Additionally, Bruce announced that Honduras will be extraditing a suspect to the U.S. to face trial for the death of American woman Sarah Root.
Sarah Root was tragically murdered in 2018 by an illegal alien who was driving under the influence and became a fugitive from justice.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
House lawmakers are seeking to crack down on China's secret police stations in the U.S. as Chinese Communist Party operations try to repatriate fugitives and dissidents to China. Tune into NTD's Capital Report at 7 p.m. Eastern as we explore with Gordon Chang how America is pushing back against the CCP's global ambitions. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche confirmed in a court filing today that the Justice Department is set to invoke a state secrets privilege in its showdown with a federal judge. NTD's Arlene Richards has the details.
In a court filing on Friday, the Justice Department confirmed that it might invoke the state secrets privilege to not comply with the judge's order. Judge James Boasberg is challenging the department's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelan immigrants they believe are members of terrorist group Tren de Aragua. At a press conference Friday, President Trump told a reporter he doesn't need the judge's permission to deport them.
Well, that's what the law says, and that's what our country needs, because unfortunately, they allowed millions of people to come into our country, totally unvetted, totally unchecked. So when you ask me if we have the authority, did Biden have the authority to allow millions of people to come into our country? Many of these people, hardened criminals at the top of the line who have caused tremendous damage in our country.
The state secrets privilege allows government lawyers to exclude evidence based solely on declarations that it might disclose sensitive information and endanger national security. Meanwhile, at a hearing Friday afternoon, Boasberg conceded that the president has wide latitude to make decisions involving national security. Nonetheless, he repeatedly asked the Justice Department attorney if he understood the judge's order to turn around 3 planes transporting the immigrants to El Salvador. The judge said he would get to the bottom of whether or not the Trump administration failed to comply with his order and what the consequences should be. The attorneys representing the immigrants contend that not all of them are members of the group, and they had the right to a hearing to determine that. Boasberg suggested that he did have authority to determine if they were members or not. The government argued the matter should be heard in a different court. Boasberg didn't make a ruling, but hinted that he may be open to revising his temporary restraining order, which bars the government from deporting anyone under the Alien Enemies Act. Boasberg is likely to permit the administration to continue deporting individuals under other immigration laws, but he said they can't rely upon the Alien Enemies Act. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
President Trump says the Small Business Administration will take up the Department of Education student loan portfolio. His announcement comes less than a day after he signed an executive order beginning the process of dismantling the department.
I've decided that the SBA, the Small Business Administration, headed by Kelly Loeffler, who's a terrific person, will handle all of the student loan portfolio. We have a portfolio that's very large, lots of loans.
According to 2 sources, the student loan portfolio totals a staggering $1.8 trillion in debt, and an estimated 40% of loans are past due. Trump also announced that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the Department of Health and Human Services will lead funding efforts for special needs students. Protesters in Israel continue to clash with police right outside of the home of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This comes after he instructed Israeli forces to resume operations in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Israel has reported killing several high-level members of the Hamas terrorist group. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
Israeli police attempted to keep protesters under control on Friday as they demonstrated right outside of the home of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Many people have been voicing concerns about the country after Netanyahu instructed the military to resume operations in the Gaza Strip.
We are very concerned that these are the last days of Israel as a democracy. We are here to try and change this course, but the chances are not very high.
Many also expressed concerns for the hostages still held in the Gaza Strip.
So, Mr. Trump, please make all the efforts that are needed. Seal the deal. Bring the families to be united again. We need them alive.
The president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, also voiced his concerns about the situation.
It is inconceivable to resume the fighting in order to fulfill the sacred command to bring back the hostages, while at the same time not listening to and supporting their anxious families who are enduring hell on earth.
However, during the recent operations in the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces reported killing several high-level members of the Hamas terrorist group. And on Friday, Israel reported killing the head of Hamas's military intelligence for the southern Gaza Strip. This comes as Hamas on Friday said they are currently reviewing the latest ceasefire proposal put forward by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Meanwhile, Israel's chief of the general staff met with troops in Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. And on Friday, residents from Judea and Samaria were met by Israeli forces at checkpoints as they attempted to go to Jerusalem for Ramadan prayers.
When I arrived here and tried to enter, I had a permit with me, but I forgot my magnetic card. I was turned back even though I asked the soldier to check my ID and verify it on the computer to confirm that I didn't have anything wrong and that I have a permit and am allowed to cross.
And for the ones who did make it through, they were able to pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, as Israel stepped up security during the Islamic holy month of fasting. Jason Perry, NTD News.
President Trump says Russia and Ukraine might soon agree to a full ceasefire. This after 3 years of war. So far, the two sides have agreed only to a limited temporary truce. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the Ukraine update.
Pretty soon have a full ceasefire, and then we're going to have a contract.
President Trump on Friday saying he's getting closer to achieving lasting peace in Ukraine. One of the main questions regarding an end to the fighting is how to divide Ukrainian land currently occupied by Russia.
The contract's being negotiated, the contract in terms of dividing up the lands, etc., etc. It's being negotiated as we speak.
Now, President Trump's comments come after both Russia and Ukraine agreed to a limited ceasefire on energy and infrastructure. That truce is set to be in place for 30 days. Trump also says he's close to reaching a minerals deal with Ukraine. He wants to use the minerals as a financial guarantee for the money the US is sending Ukraine. On Friday, a Ukrainian spokesperson gave an update on the status of the deal, saying the two countries keep working on it.
Ukraine was ready to sign the framework deal that was agreed. On the American side, we heard the desire hold consultations on their side regarding this deal. Overall, I can confirm that Ukrainian and American teams are working on the deal.
The minerals deal was derailed when a meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Trump devolved into a heated argument. But both sides now confirm that the deal is back on track. The minerals are key components in the manufacturing of modern technology, such as smartphones and electric vehicles. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
London's Heathrow Airport is reopening after a fire at an electrical substation forced the site to temporarily shut down. Flights were canceled, with disruption expected worldwide for days. Authorities are working to establish the cause of the fire. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more on this.
Over 200,000 passengers have had their flights to or from London's Heathrow Airport cancelled or diverted. It follows a fire at an electrical substation nearby. Heathrow Airport is resuming some flights as of Friday evening local time. Britain's Department of Transport said restrictions on overnight flights have been temporarily lifted to help ease congestion. The airport hopes to be fully operational on Saturday. British counter-terrorism police are leading the investigation into the cause of the fire. London Mayor Sadiq Khan said their involvement is standard procedure.
Clearly, because of the proximity of the substation to the airport, it's not a surprise the counter-terror team's been involved. The Met Police Service, the Fire Brigade, will make sure that the public know whenever there's any information to pass on to the public, but there's no reason at all to suspect foul play at the moment.
Huge orange flames and plumes of black smoke shot into the sky around 11 p.m. local time on Thursday. A blaze engulfed the electrical substation. Thousands of homes have been left without power. More than 100 people were evacuated from their homes. Deputy Commissioner Jonathan Smith said London Fire Brigade received 212 calls to a fire.
The fire involved a transformer comprising of 25,000 litres of cooling oil fully alight. This created a major hazard due to the still live high voltage equipment and the nature of the oil-fuelled fire.
Heathrow was forced to shut for most of the day. As Europe's busiest airport, this has disrupted flight schedules around the world. Many planes and flight crews are in the wrong location. Flights were diverted to Gatwick in South London, Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, and Ireland's Shannon Airport. A number of flights were also turned around and returned to airports in Canada and the United States. Aviation consultant John Strickland said the closure of Heathrow is a massive dislocation to have to recover from.
That there will be impact running on several days, because once aircraft are grounded somewhere away from their normal operation, they are stuck there with the crews operating the flights and of course the customers until those crews have been able to have the legally required rest periods.
Britain's National Grid said the network of the substation has been reconfigured to restore power to the parts of Heathrow Airport connected to it on an interim basis. British Energy Security Secretary Ed Miliband said it's too early to say what caused the fire.
As I say, the grid have never seen an event quite like this, so it is very unprecedented, but obviously this is a massive disruption for people at Heathrow, and obviously with any kind of event like this, we will want to learn the appropriate lesson.
London Ambulance Service said there were no casualties at the scene of the fire. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Coming up, the House and Senate are back in session next week, but how have the four big leaders fared thus far in this 119th Congress? Luis Martinez breaks it down for us. And a federal appeals court has upheld California's ban on large-capacity gun magazines, but one judge disagreed with the ruling and posted a controversial video demonstrating firearms. Christina Corona has the story when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Congressional leaders prepare to get back into session after a contentious funding battle. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez joins us to break down the main accomplishments and setbacks the Big Four have had on this 119th Congress so far.
I believe it is my job to make the best choice for the country, to minimize the harms to the American people. Therefore, I will vote to keep the government open.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, early on the 119th Congress, publicly acknowledged internal disputes among Democrats and how to approach and counter the Republican trifecta in Washington, D.C. And then we just heard from Leader Schumer why he voted in favor of the House Republican funding bill to avert a government shutdown. Now, that split from Leader Schumer from House Democrats and the vast majority of Senate Democrats has caused that he's now facing potential challenges to his leadership in 2027, with progressive group Indivisible calling for new leadership. And also, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had to cancel all of his public appearances this week of recess due to planned protests against him.
Well, I like I said, the president speaks for himself. What I want to see is a peaceful result, a peaceful outcome.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune has been settling into his new role as the leader of Senate Republicans, the majority leader in the Senate. He won the leadership race on the second ballot, defeating Rick Scott and John Cornyn easily. And he also confirmed all of President Trump's nominees and his cabinet by March 10th. That's beating the record of the previous two administrations. We also saw that Senate Majority Leader John Thune presented President Trump and the American people with an alternative path to a reconciliation process, a different one from the House. And of course, he set a very strategic calendar, because it's no coincidence that the first recess that the Senate was going to go on the 119th Congress was also the day of the funding deadline.
Well, Donald Trump, his administration, and extreme MAGA Republicans in the House are undermining everything that matters to the American people.
On the House side, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries managed to be re-elected as a leader of the House with unanimous consent from House Democrats. It was not a challenge for him to be re-elected. We did see early issues with the House Democratic Conference. Leader Jeffries, for example, called on his fellow lawmakers not to protest President Trump's first speech to a joint session of Congress. And we, of course, saw several forms of protest, including the expulsion of Representative Al Green during this speech. But then towards the funding deadline on March 14th, we also saw how Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was able to maintain the House Democratic caucus together. All but one voted against the funding bill, something that, of course, Hakeem Jeffries touted and insisted upon Senate Democrats to follow in his example.
We'll have the votes. We're going to pass the CR. We can do it on our own. But what I'm saying is Democrats ought to do the responsible thing, follow their own advice in every previous scenario, and keep the government open.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has been on a roll despite his critics. Back on January 3rd, he retained his gavel on the first ballot. And we also saw Speaker of the House Mike Johnson pass a budget resolution to kickstart the reconciliation process, which included all of President Trump's demands from Congress, including his famous tax cuts. And then, most importantly, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson passed a continuing resolution without the help of Democrats this time around. He managed to successfully negotiate with the House Freedom Caucus, who is always and has always been against a continuing resolutions, and averted a government shutdown. Now, it remains to be seen if the unity both of Senate Republicans and House Republicans will continue through the reconciliation process.
The U.S. Appeals Court has upheld California's ban on firearm magazines that can hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition, a decision that led one judge to post a video of himself demonstrating firearms in his chambers. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
A federal appeals court has upheld California's law banning firearm magazines that can hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 7-4 that the law does not violate the Second Amendment because magazines are not considered arms. Thursday's decision revives a 2016 law that had previously been blocked by lower courts. California argues that limiting magazine capacity helps prevent mass shootings, while opponents say it restricts the right to self-defense. Judge Lawrence Van Dyke strongly disagreed with the ruling. In his dissenting opinion, he linked to a YouTube video of himself demonstrating various types of firearms and their parts and accessories.
This is the first video like this that I've ever made. I share this not to supplement the factual record that we're using to decide this case. Instead, I share this because a rudimentary understanding of how guns are made, sold, used, and commonly modified makes obvious why California's proposed test and the one my colleagues are adopting today simply does not work.
In the video, Van Dyke argues that the ruling is flawed because so-called high-capacity magazines are no different from other accessories like optical sights and grips that can allow a gun to be fired more quickly and accurately. He says the ruling opens the door for the government to ban any such items. Several judges reacted strongly to the video, with some calling it an unusual and inappropriate response. The case could be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has recently backed stronger gun rights. For now, the law remains in effect. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, Tesla dealerships across the country are seeing a surge in vandalism and arson attacks. We'll hear from folks in D.C. for their reactions. And U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi calls the acts of vandalism against Tesla domestic terrorism. A Homeland Security and counterterrorism analyst joins us to discuss whether the attacks could result in federal terrorism convictions and whether the violence could be part of a coordinated effort. Stay tuned for that after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Since President Trump took office, Tesla vehicles have become targets of numerous arson attacks as well as vandalism. How are everyday Americans reacting to these acts of violence? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
What's your reaction to this latest round of attacks on Tesla cars?
Well, I think it's criminal, and the people need to be prosecuted for that.
I don't see scratching cars or setting them on fire is a way to
achieve your ends?
I've read a little bit about that, and I think it's ridiculous because they're supposed to be saving the environment. You're going to burn those cars, and the batteries are toxic when the fumes get up, so you're kind of like shooting yourself in the foot.
We're from California, so we see a lot of the, hey, I bought this car before, he was a monster. And I'm just like, what does that have to anything? Like, it's a car.
There was protesters in San Francisco who said, he's like, yeah, I have a Tesla. He's like, but I get free charges. He's like, why would I give up my car with free charges just because I don't agree with the man who created it?
Elon Musk, has put his life on hold to do this, and people are treating him with such disrespect. I can't even begin to imagine how anyone could feel good about what they're doing.
Things have gotten out of hand, right? You can have differences of opinions, but now you're bordering on. We've heard the domestic terrorism label getting thrown around, but that's kind of where we're getting to, and it's fallen a long way.
And do you guys feel like Tesla drivers are getting the bad look for possible political affiliation?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't buy one today after all of that stuff. If I did, I'd make sure it's very well insured, right?
That's what it seems like. I can't, I want to put words in people's mouths, but sure is what it seems like.
It shouldn't be. Tesla has nothing to do with politics at all.
I know a few people that own Teslas, but I haven't seen any of that. But I live out in California, so.
I think people assume that because, they're driving a Tesla, that they automatically support Trump or Elon.
Democrats or left tend to lean more towards clean energy and things like that, and that's what they drive it for, not for any political affiliation.
I'm pretty sure you'll probably, in California, find more Democrats driving Teslas than Republicans.
I'm not ashamed of the fact that I am a huge proponent of our government right now. I think you have to fight for what you believe in, and you have to make a stand on it and say, this is what I believe, and I'm not ashamed of my values.
This week, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi condemned recent acts of vandalism against Tesla and confirmed that the Justice Department has charged several suspects over the attacks. That's after a fire was started at a Tesla service center in Las Vegas and multiple vehicles were shot at. President Trump also defended Tesla CEO Elon Musk on Truth Social today, saying the people who are targeting Musk and Tesla should get, quote, 20-year jail sentences. Joining us now to discuss these latest developments is Kyle Scheidler, Director and Senior Analyst for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism at the Center for Security Policy. He's also the editor of the book Unmasking Antifa, 5 Perspectives on a Growing Threat. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, AG Pam Bondi has come out against these attacks, saying those involved will face the full force of law, citing domestic terrorism. First, what's your reaction to her response and the use of the label domestic terrorism here?
Well, I think most Americans understand that firebombing a car dealership is a form of political violence in this case, and they feel like the term domestic terrorism seems to apply. But federal law doesn't necessarily work that way. Federal terrorism law requires certain types of predicate crimes to have something attached to the label federal terrorism. So arson is one of those crimes, but federal arson only applies in certain cases, such as the disruption of interstate commerce or the targeting of federal buildings. So while I think AG Pam Bondi is speaking to what most people understand to be terrorism when they see this act of political violence, whether it actually gets that designation of a federal terrorism crime will be a matter that will be determined as they go through the investigation process. And I assume that they will amend these charges going forward with some of these suspects. So we'll look and see what actually ends up happening. But I wouldn't be surprised necessarily if we see arson charges, we see destructive device charges, but we don't necessarily see a terrorism charge.
Now, expanding on that, do you think these attacks will ultimately result in federal terrorism convictions? What precedent is there for cases like these?
Well, in most cases, you don't see federal terrorism charges in cases like this. But if you go back into the history of, for example, eco-terrorism in the United States, the targeted attacks against car dealerships were a major issue in the early 2000s against, for example, car dealerships selling Hummers, for example. There are other examples of eco-terrorists targeting everything from snow ski resorts to electrical substations or what have you. But unless it targets critical infrastructure, a federal building, or certain other specific cases, typically you don't see those federal terrorism charges attached. That doesn't mean it's not necessarily going to be described as terrorism by the government or in the press, but they may not get that specific federal terrorism charge.
Now, many have come out calling the violence against Tesla coordinated, including Musk himself, although law enforcement officials haven't yet confirmed this to be the case. You actually noted on X recently that this is something we've seen in Europe. Talk to us about those similarities. What's behind these attacks?
Sure. So anarchists in Europe have been targeting Elon Musk and Tesla for a number of years now, really at least back to 2023, focusing on a Tesla factory that is being built in Germany. There are a number of eco-anarchist groups that have taken offense to that, so to speak, and have responded by targeting Musk, targeting Tesla dealerships, targeting electrical substations that supply the factory, and so on. So there has been actually a growing trend of anarchist networks targeting Tesla and targeting Musk even before the election of Donald Trump in 2024, and Musk taking up his role in the Doge efficiency department.
Zooming in on that, actually, what do you make of the swift turnaround on Musk, if you will, especially the media, from, say, benefiting under the Biden administration's push for EVs and green energy to becoming public enemy number one?
Well, you mentioned the word coordinated earlier, and that's certainly what we have in this case. You have large nonprofits, 501c4s, some of them connected with very traditional democratic political spheres, pushing Elon Musk and Tesla as a target, as a political target. They've called for protesting outside Tesla dealerships, etc. And what you see in these kinds of movements is a sort of a wide scale. The movements try to draw in as many people as possible to participate. Now, some of those people will engage in what are completely legitimate and completely legal free speech protests. They may stand outside a Tesla dealership holding a sign, and that's legitimate. They have every right to do that. But when you create these kinds of campaigns, you are also creating materials that can be used for people with more nefarious purposes. And so when we have groups like Tesla Takedown, which are organizing protests and listing Tesla dealerships for people to target, they may be targeted for legitimate protest, or they may be targeted for criminal acts. And so we often see that these things tend to go hand in hand. And in radical political environments, particularly on the left, you have what is called a diversity of tactics policy. And this is where groups will say, I am for nonviolence. I want to engage in First Amendment protected activities, but others may feel differently. And if they engage in activities that cross the line, well, I'm not going to say anything about that, and I'm not going to complain about it. And so you have an environment of organized radical politics which tolerates these groups that step over the line into criminal and sometimes even terrorist acts.
Now, given that we can expect Musk to continue his work with Doge, which means the spotlight will continue to be on him for better or worse, what would be the message of deterrence the administration needs to send to quell such attacks?
Well, I think it's going to require a number of steps. First, they're going to have to secure very serious convictions in these cases. We don't want to see a slap on the wrist style sentence, as we often saw during the Biden administration against radical left-wing extremists who were charged for doing various things. We often saw them receive very minimal sentences, sometimes even federal prosecutors recommending minimal sentences in some of those cases coming out of, for example, the BLM protests and riots in 2020. I don't expect the Trump administration Department of Justice to behave the same way, but prosecutors do have a tendency to reduce charges and to seek pleas where and when they can. So I think if they want to send the message that this is not going to be tolerated, they need to go for maximum sentencing. They need to go for convictions. They may need to go to serious. They may need to build a serious case and go to trial, even if maybe the defense is offering them the easy way out with a plea deal, because if they want to really send the message that this isn't going to be tolerated. The other thing that needs to happen is this radical network that supports and builds around these acts of domestic terrorism needs to be targeted. There are individuals who train people to engage in direct actions, who teach them how to avoid police detection, who teach them how to promote their actions in the media, knowing full well that they will be used criminally. Some organizations and websites even display explanations on how to build incendiary devices and the like. Building those connections into those networks and targeting those people for the role that they play in providing material support for this activity would go a long way to deterring it. If they only target the individual who actually throws the Molotov cocktail, that there are always going to be people who are willing to take that risk.
A lot at stake here for sure. Kyle Scheidler, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up in college hoops, March Madness continues with more round one action. Dave Martin joins us with all the scores. And capturing the hearts of people in Salt Lake City. Theater goers say their Shen experience was beyond expectations. Hear their feedback after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on right now, especially in college hoops. So let's start there. Round one continued this afternoon with 8 more games. What were some notable highlights?
You know, in these early rounds, usually the upsets are the main highlights. We had a minor one this afternoon. 12th seeded Colorado State upset number 5 Memphis 78-70. Now the Rams trailed at the half in this one, then they rallied in the second half, took the lead with about 15 minutes left, never looked back. So that's their first tournament win in a dozen years. They'll play in the second round Sunday against the winner of Maryland Grand Canyon. Maryland's leading that one right now. Let's look at some more scores here, though. Baylor beat Mississippi State 75-72 in a game that was pretty tight the whole way through. Alabama topped Robert Morris 90-81 in another close one. And third-seeded Iowa State beat Lipscomb 82-55 in a game that really wasn't close there. Now, the Cyclones shot 58% from the floor in the win. They will go ahead and advance to play on Sunday. Let's look at some more scores here. North Carolina lost to Ole Miss 71-64, despite a furious comeback by the Tar Heels, who trailed by 22 points. Meanwhile, St. Mary's beat Vanderbilt 59-56. Duke, meanwhile, had no problem with Mount St. Mary's, winning by 44 points. Now, the big question about Duke was whether Cooper Flagg would play. He did. He played 22 minutes, scored 14 points. So they'll advance to round 2 when they play Baylor on Sunday.
Now, there was an AP report today that said fewer than 1% of tournament brackets were still perfect after the first day. Does that sound correct to you?
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I mean, my bracket challenge, there's no perfect brackets left. And of course, as someone who's filled these out every single year, I mean, I can tell you, I'm happy if I get even one team make it to the Final Four, let alone get a perfect bracket. Now, no one has ever had a verified perfect bracket. There was someone in 2019 who got the first 49 games correct, which is pretty amazing. His bracket was busted by the Sweet 16, though. Yesterday, mine was busted early on when Creighton beat Louisville. That was like the second game there. ESPN said that game busted more than 13 million of their brackets. And if it wasn't busted by that, it was McNeese State's win over Clemson or Drake beating Missouri. Yahoo Sports said 99.6% of the brackets submitted were officially busted after Drake's win there. So it's very difficult to predict these games, and it's almost like the more you know, that the worse you become. You know, I've been in several office polls where I didn't win, and the winner, you know, made their picks based on, you know, favorite colors, or they had a friend go to a certain school. Illogical reasons can win here too. So it's a true crapshoot, I'll tell you that.
To go by the vibes, it sounds. Well, shifting gears to hockey, Washington's Alex Ovechkin scored last night, number 888 in his career, as the Capitals clinched a playoff spot.
Yeah, he's now 7 goals away from breaking Gretzky's all-time record. 13 games left to do it. Now, his pace has been 2 every 3. He's got to do pretty much 1 every 2, so he should do it before the end of the season. And he's now 4th in goals scored this year with 35, which is incredible. Considering he's missed 16 games due to injury, and considering the guy is 39 years old, I can't emphasize that enough. Now, lost in all this has really been the team's success. The Capitals have an even 100 points on the season. That is tied for the most in the NHL. They're the first team to actually clinch a playoff spot. And if they do, if they end up with the most points, in their conference, they'll have home ice advantage. Ovechkin could possibly be looking at breaking Gretzky's record in April and then winning the Stanley Cup in June, which would be quite a couple months there for him.
Looking at tonight's college basketball action, 8 more games are on the schedule. What do you see as some of the better matchups?
I think UConn versus Oklahoma is going to be a good one. This is an 8 seed versus a 9 seed. Obviously, UConn is a 2-time defending champion. They have not had a great regular season like they have the last 2 years. Oklahoma, meanwhile, they're certainly very battle-tested coming out of the SEC. That game should start around 9:25 Eastern time tonight. The winner of that will likely play Florida. Now, the Gators are 27.5-point favorites to beat Norfolk State. That game should just be underway about right now, too. Now, there's some other Blue Blood schools in action. We've got Kentucky, Arizona, Michigan State. I'm not expecting any of them to lose. Of course, if one of them did, we'd probably have 0 perfect brackets left. So some exciting games probably on tonight, so be sure to watch.
Lots at stake. Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
In the capital city of Utah, Shen is touching the hearts of many. One patron said it was above and beyond what she expected. NTD is a proud media sponsor of Shen Performing Arts.
Audiences in Salt Lake City shared their Shen experience from the March 19 and 20 shows at the Eccles Theater.
Oh, it's spectacular. I had no idea what to expect, and it's above and beyond what I thought it would be.
Oh, visual masterpiece. Beautiful, amazing colors. The talent was off the charts.
I have a music background, and so I have an appreciation for just the beautiful music.
Based in New York, Shen Yun's mission is to revive genuine traditional culture, from legends to modern-day stories of the current persecution happening in China. Patrons were moved.
Not only was it beautiful to watch, but it was beautiful to my heart. I felt the message.
I love it. I support the endeavor. It's unfortunate that you can't take this production and show it in China, but hopefully you can take it everywhere else. It has a great message.
I love the faith that they have, bringing them forward, and the courage to do what they're doing. It surprises me that they're courageous enough to do what they're doing and be so proud of it.
When I saw it and I felt what I felt, I can honestly say you cannot feel something like that unless it's true. There's no way you can have that feeling and that it's false. The expression of the movie was unbelievable. It was nothing less than perfect.
The performances in Salt Lake City will continue at the Eccles Theater until March 23rd. NTD News, Salt Lake City, Utah.
That's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.